But now let me shift gears from magic to what is really my academic field, which is poetry. You can tell I'm an academic because I have this gown. It's for a PhD, Doctor of Philosophy. And at the University of North Carolina, I studied English literature. I could quote Beowulf in Old English, "What that we are dana and ye are dogum." And Chaucer, "One that Aprila with the shore sought, the draft the match is passing to the rot." I knew bibliographies. I knew the difference between a spondy and an alexandrine and an anapest and pentameter. And I had studied everything and I got my degree. But now I'm going to tell another story and with it a confession. For all that studying, I realize now I never really enjoyed it. I had worked so hard studying that I didn't understand what T.H. White and Merlin were saying to us. Learning, not studying, is the thing for you. Let me tell this story. My wife Polly was working for a number of years at Pooh's Corner. Some of you will remember that children's bookstore on Park Avenue. And she went in there, she was in there one time when a woman came in, was looking around, and they got chatting. They got talking about favorite books and favorite illustrators. They had a wonderful talk. Talked about their children and grandchildren, and it went on, 45 minutes or so. Slow day at Pooh's Corner. Suddenly the woman looked at her watch and said, "Oh, I'm supposed to meet my daughter, I have to leave." And she started out the door, and then she turned and said to Polly, "Thank you. You've been my dust of snow," and walked out. And Polly came home that evening, we were talking at dinner. She told that story. She said, I wonder what she meant. That sounds so familiar. And I said, "Yeah, it does, but I don't know. It sounds like it might be Robert Frost." So I went to the bookcase and pulled out our Robert Frost, went to the index, and sure enough, in the back was Dust of Snow, 37 words. "The way a crow shook down on me the dust of snow from a hemlock tree has given my heart a change of mood and saved some part of a day I had rued." And that woman meant that that conversation with Polly was one of those moments that made her affirm her life and the day around her and changed some part of a day I had rued. And we got talking about it and realized our life is filled with those moments which we so often miss. And then we got talking more about Robert Frost and his poetry and remembered that he wrote a poem ends in a clarification of life. And then he goes on to say, not necessarily a great clarification, such as sex and cults are founded on, but in a momentary stay against confusion. And that woman talked about that moment. And then I read some more Frost, and he said this, which has had a profound influence on my understanding and pleasure in poetry. He said, what poetry is all about is an emotion finds a thought, and the thought finds the words. And those 37 words in Dust of Snow were that emotion which we've all experienced, which in this case was that moment of a dust of snow. Now let me tell another story. After I finished my administrative years, I went back to where I started teaching English, and by now I had discovered poetry. And then I met my colleague Phil Deaver, teaches at Rollins. You will know him as Ms. Lily's husband. And Phil introduced me to Billy Collins. And many of you know Billy Collins is now a neighbor. He lives here in Winter Park, is associated with Rollins and the Winter Park Institute. But Billy Collins' poetry, if you've not read it yet, part of my message is to urge you to discover him and let him open the doors. But he had one poem that I used to begin every class that I taught, every course that I taught, called Introduction to Poetry. He said, I asked them to take a poem and hold it to the light like a color slide or press an ear against its hive. I say drop a mouse into a poem and watch him probe his way out. Or walk inside the poem's room and feel the walls for a light switch. I want them to water ski across the surface of a poem, waving at the author's name on the shore. But all they want to do is tie the poem to a chair with a rope and torture a confession out of it. They begin beating it with a hose to find out what it really means. And that helped me so much in understanding that the real key to poetry was to enjoy it. The last reference to a poem. A friend introduced me, and I began more and more to enjoy the poetry of Walt Whitman and Leaves of Grass. I want to read a little of that. Now, not all of it. It's 400 poems, 500 pages long. But I do want to read one brief passage because I would pass it out to my first-year students, and it's a message I would want to leave with the graduates. He's walking with a young man, and he says, "Now I wash the gum from your eyes. You must habit yourself to the dazzle of the light and of every moment in your life. Long have you timidly waited holding a plank by the shore. Now I will you to be a bold swimmer, to jump off in the midst of the sea, rise again, nod to me, shout, and laughingly dash with your hair. Be a bold swimmer." Now, all of this came to me with some clarity when yesterday, because I now enjoy poetry so much, I was listening to the Writer's Almanac, Garrison Keillor, and he got talking about Walt Whitman and the fact that when Whitman wrote his first book, he sent a copy to Ralph Waldo Emerson. Whitman was a young newspaper man. Emerson was the towering literary figure of America. And Emerson wrote back, "I greet you at the beginning of a great career." And that's really what this occasion is all about. We greet you at the beginning of a great career. And again,